Okay, so we're working on learning these common ions, and when we look at this list, this looks is a bit intimidating. There's lots of symbols, there's lots of letters. Now for level 2, we are working only on the negative ions. So we're focusing on the bottom half, which are called anions, which unfortunately is the biggest, hardest list. So what we want to do in this video is show you some tricks to help make your life a lot easier to help you learn these. And when it comes down to it, if you learn a lot of these patterns, it will make your life a ton easier. Now you will note in the bottom right hand corner there are the other common variations that are listed. Those are more rarely used ions, and so those are not ones that you need to have memorized. But all the rest of these, we want to make sure that we have them memorized. So one trick you can do is by thinking about my dinner last night. Last night for dinner, I ate some corn on the Klob Knob Cob with soy poi sauce. And ooh, it was good. Okay, I love corn on the Klob Knob Cob with soy poi sauce. Now, why is that helpful? Why am I talking about what I ate? It looks kind of messy in this video here. Well, if we look at this Klob Knob Cob with soy poi sauce, this actually will help us to identify what some of these formulas are. As you've probably seen with some of the questions already, when we look at ions that end with ate and ite, they have oxygen in them. And the tricky part is helping us to memorize how many oxygens. Sometimes there's O3 endings and sometimes there's O4 endings and stuff. So if you remember our little saying, it'll actually help you remember how many O's are in each. We've got Klob Knob Cob with soy poi sauce. Well, what do the B's look like in this picture here? If you use your imagination, you can realize that these B's look like threes. So Klob Knob Cob, we have ClO3 and NO3 and CO3, and we ate the Klob Knob Cob. So this tells us who the eights are, because there are patterns with the eights and the ites. So this saying will help you memorize who the eights are. So if I'm not sure, wait, is carbonate, is it CO4, is it CO2, is it CO3? What is carbonate? Well, I ate Klob Knob Cob, so it's a B, which is a 3. And so that'll help me remember that it is CO3. So we have chlorate, nitrate, and carbonate. Those are all O3s. And then we have our soy poi sauce. And if you use your imagination, that Y looks a heck of a lot like a 4. So the soy pois, those are the O4s. So sulfate has 4 O's in it, and phosphate has 4 O's in it. So that'll help you with some. Now, this is not all of the ions that are on our list, but these guys are very, very commonly used, and it'll give you a good foundation to help you with a lot of formulas that you see. Now, the other thing that you have to memorize with these, along with how many O's are there, is what the charge is. And this pattern will help you a little bit with that too, because the ones that we start off with have the lower charge. So we start off with a couple -1 guys. And then when we get to the cob, the carbonate here, now we bump up to -2s. And our very last guy, the end guy in the saying, the phosphate, he has a -3 charge. So sometimes I have people, they like to write this little saying out on their quizzes and things or on their papers to help them remember how these ions are. So this will help you with a good deal here. So what this actually does is not only want to help you know the formula, but there's other patterns that you can use to really help narrow down which ones you need to memorize. And so remember, our saying helps us with a lot of these eights. Now notice there's other endings. Some of these guys, we've got eights and we've got ites, and there's pers. And so we have a variety of different prefixes and suffixes here. We've got pers and hypos and eights and ites. So how can I use those suffixes and prefixes to help me memorize these? Well, here's your pattern for this. Okay, I grew up in the 80s, so I like Pac-Man. So our saying that I kind of use is the ate the ites. And this all has to do, a lot of this has to do with how many O's there are. So if you go back and look at this sheet, you'll see the difference between all these is how many O's are there. Is it O2? Is it O3? Is it O4? So thinking of this will help us remember that. And so this gives you a hierarchy. Our eights are kind of the baseline. So the ate the ite. So however many O's your 8 has, the ite is always one less than that. Okay. So for my example, if I'm doing nitrate, who is an O3 guy, the ite always has one less O. So nitrite would be NO2. And then they have charges. Now, the nice thing about these families is that they always have the same charges. If the 8 is NO3, then the -1, then the nitrite is also -1. And then if we had a prefix hypo in front of it, if we had like hyponitrite, that's even one less oxygen. So I think of hypo like, you have hypothermia, it's down really low, your temperature is really low. So think of that at the bottom as the low numbers. So that would be just NO -1. And then going the other way, hyper, that's like over the top. We have old Taz here. He's just crazy hyperactive and over the top. So that is even one more O. So that would be NO4. So I center this all around the 8s. So when you're working on memorizing these ions, focus on memorizing the 8s, and that will help you use this framework to figure the rest of them out. Okay, so another family, the chlor family is here. So how does this all fit in? Well, if I memorize, okay, corn on the clob. So chlor is ClO and it's a clob, so that means it's an O3, and it's the first guy in my saying, clob knob cob, so that means it's a -1. So I've memorized that. Now, if I know my patterns, I can figure everything else out. Because if I go down to my ites, well, the 8 ate the ites. So the ite is lower. So that means this has one less O, ClO2. It still has a -1 charge. And then hypo, well, that's even down lower than that. So that's got one less O. And so that's ClO negative. And then we have the per, which is like hyper. And so perchlorate is one oxygen above the chlorate. So that would be ClO4, -1. So I memorized one thing, and then I can use my pattern to figure all the rest of them out. Okay, another pattern is all the stuff that ends in "ide." Well, that's just the monatomic stuff. So when I say chloride, that's the monatomic ion, which means there's no O in it at all. It's just chlorine with a -1 charge. And then if I see chlorine, well, that's talking about just the element. So the ene is the element with no charge. The ide is the monatomic element. And then we have the 8 ites with the prefixes and suffix family. So you can take your list that we had with all the other stuff on there and focus on just the ites first. If you use flashcards, just pull out the 8s. Pull out and keep only the 8s in one pile and work on learning those first. And then if you know this pattern, you can figure everything else. So quickly looking at this other example here with the sulfur and the sulfate, I've memorized the 8s. And again, you can go back to your pattern to figure this out. Okay, I ate some corn in the clob, knob, cob with soy poi sauce. So sulfur and sulfate is a soy. That means it is SO4. And then what's its charge? Well, the first couple are -1s. Then we have -2s. So sulfate is SO4 -2. That means all the rest of the ions are -2. So sulfate, the 8 ate the ite. So that means sulfite has one less O. It's SO3. Hypo is lower yet even. So that would be SO2, -2. And then persulfate, that's over the top, hyper, per. And so that is SO5. Sorry about that. -2. Okay, now we get to sulfide, and again, the ide, that's the monatomic. That's no oxygens at all, so that would be just S, and it is -2, and then sulfur is just the element. So hopefully you see how knowing this pattern makes your life a lot easier. Just memorize the 8s, and you get everybody else figured out from doing this. Okay, so if we take a minute here and we do this matching, it's not so bad. I see bromide, so that's just the monatomic ion. So ide is all ions, so I know that's B here. Bromine, that's the element itself, so that's just straight up Br, that's letter D. And now we have the 8 and the ite, and I know my pattern is that the 8s are always one more O than the ites. So I have O3 and O2 left, so that means this one must be Brom 8. And then the one lower, the 8, the ite, so O3, so ite is one lower than that, so C would be this. And we can also answer questions like this. Even though I don't even have selenium on my list in selenide, which is an element, well, I know that when I see the "ide" ending, I know that's the ion. So the element would be just selenium. Okay, number 6 here, which has a charge? Well, ions have charges, elements don't. So I see "ide," again, the IDE ending, that means it's an ion. So fluoride is going to have a charge. It's F-1, whereas fluorine is the element. So that one little letter makes a difference between the element and the ion. Okay, which is going to contain oxygen. Well, iodine, that's the element. That's just I. Iodide, that's monatomic things, so that's just I with a -1 charge. And here's an 8. So remember, everybody that ends in 8s and ites and all that stuff, they've got oxygen in the formula. So iodate would be the only one that has an O in that formula. Okay, and then last but not least here, which has more O's, nitrate or nitrite. And even if I don't have these memorized, I do remember that the 8 the ites. So the 8s have more O's. They're like Pac-Man on top. The ites are down below. So nitrate is the higher number of O's. So you can use these tricks to help make this a lot simpler, and you'll know these ions and no problem flat. So good luck.